All right, so today we're getting into the long-awaited topic of automation. Now, I'm going to break this up into at least two separate videos. Today is going to be all about volume and panning automation. And in the next video, we're going to get into plugin automation. Now, automation in general is kind of like a remote control for pretty much everything that you have in your mixing process. Volume automation is the most common, where it's like having a remote control for your fader. But depending on your DAW, you can also automate almost everything. And that makes automation one of the most powerful tools that we have at our disposal. So let's dive right into it and start exploring some automation. So as mix engineers, you could kind of think of our role as being like an unseen member of the band. And oftentimes, if we do our job right, we're kind of the unsung hero of the song. And a big part of our job is to accent and embellish and enhance the performance without distracting the listener. And a lot of times, our best moves are things that the listener will never notice. That's kind of the way that it should be. And one of our biggest tools to do this is automation. Automation can help us keep our mix unique, and we can prevent the mix from becoming static and keep it breathing. And we can prevent a mix from becoming predictable. But at the end of the day, the automation and the plugins and all the tools that we have at our disposal, they need to serve the big picture. They're things that we use to help the song blossom. And it's a really powerful thing as long as you're not overdoing it. With volume automation, we can pull things back to let other things breathe. We can push things forward to give emphasis. And we can use it to increase a differentiation between, say, a verse and a chorus. But the example we're going to start with today is simply using volume automation as an introduction tool. Now, a lot of times it's helpful to have a certain sound be just a little bit louder when it's first introduced. That way the listener gets a chance to really get to know the sound and get accustomed with the frequency spectrum that it's inhabiting. And once the ear is a little used to it, you can dial it back a little further in the mix, nice and subtly and slowly, and let it dip behind other things just a little bit more in the background. But because you brought it forward when it was first introduced, the listener is now familiar with it, so they don't miss it when it dips back. If it's too quiet when it comes in, the listener could be straining to fully identify and become familiar with that sound. But introduction of sound is a great volume automation opportunity. So let's start with that. Now, this song has a really long intro and a slow build, and I think it's over a minute before you even start hearing the singing. And the first instrument to come in is some cymbal rolls that lead into the toms. And the first thing we're going to do is automate the cymbals so they fade in a little more. And then after the toms are introduced, we're going to roll them back just about 1 dB while the guitars come in. So this way the listener isn't distracted by the cymbal roll. We want to fade that in. And then when the toms come in, we're going to let the listener really hear them and get used to them. And then we're going to dial them back a little bit so that when the guitars come in, the guitars can be the feature. So take a listen. So right there, the cymbals are at full volume, and we're going to bring it down back here, and we're going to get them to fade in a little better. And I'm going to dip this out a little bit, make a little bit more of an arc. There we go. And when the toms come in, they have a couple bars before the guitars. And by the time the guitars come in, we're going to dip them down about 1 dB. So this is where the fade is going to start. So it's going to be super subtle. It's not going to be distracting. But this way, the listeners had a few seconds to acquaint their ears with the toms, and then they'll dip out a little bit behind the guitars. And there we go. And that is barely noticeable. And those guitars are on their own bus. And those guitars go for a few bars before the second rhythm guitar comes in. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to let those guitars come in a little louder, and then we're going to dip them back about a decibel. Right there. Let's take a listen. Both of those guitars dip back a decibel for when this clean PRS comes in, this one here. And what we're going to do is, since this fader is set right about where we want it for the duration of the song, we're actually going to increase this when it comes in, and then we'll dial it back a little bit as well. So this way this guitar comes in 2 decibels louder. And let's take a listen. I'm actually going to increase this volume a little bit and give it another decibel there. There we go. That little subtlety is very nice. This way, as the song is developing and starting off, the listener gets to hear everything kind of in its own space a little bit, and then it will slowly volume automate back to where the original settings of the faders are, which was the balance that we created for the mix. These are awesome little volume automation tools. They make a big difference when you add up all these little changes, but they're super subtle, and they're not going to take away from the big picture and the experience of the listener. They're going to help the listener enjoy the song, and it's going to help the band feature the instruments, but it's not going to distract anyone. Now, this is the next guitar that comes in. For the intro, I want to bump this up a little bit. I want this to be really nice and noticeable because this is the last guitar to be introduced before the verse starts. I'm actually going to bump up the first one a little bit more. Let's do another decibel and see how that sounds. Going to extend that over here as well. And that last little part, I'm actually going to bump up even further. I want that part to be nice and noticeable. Let's take a listen to this now. Perfect. Very subtle, not distracting, but super enhancing for the overall experience there. Now, the next thing is when the snare comes in at the beginning of this song, playing on the offbeats, we have 2 different snares going that are blended together, and we have a snare bus for those. The snare bus is at the volume we want for the verses and choruses. We're probably going to do a little automation there as well, but when they come in at the beginning of the song, they're a little too loud. So we're going to dial that snare back at the beginning of the song, and that's going to help the overall build and climax into the first chorus. And those are our first snare hits right there. And now we're going to go to the end of the first verse. And right there is where we're going to go into the first pre-chorus. So we are going to dial the snare back for the intro and the first verse and let it come up to its full volume for the first pre-chorus. So by here, we want the snare to be at full volume. Now let's take a listen to that. Now the snare in the intro is 3 dB quieter. Yeah, there we go. Now it's a little more background, not so much in our face. Yeah, very nice. And then when the snare goes to full volume, it's only going to add more to the overall build of this song starting to take off and pick up steam. There's a handful of subtle volume automation ideas for you. It's totally worth it to take the time to make those happen. And the long intro of a song is a great way to demonstrate it for you guys. And before we leave the intro of this song, the next thing we want to do is some panning automation. And we're going to introduce the listener to a little stereoscape enhancement there right as the song's getting going. So these are those first 2 guitars here in kind of this darker blue-green. Let me highlight them for you. One is panned hard left and one is panned hard right. But we're going to start off with them a little more centered when they first get introduced, and then we're going to open up slowly over the full spectrum. That way, if our listener is on headphones, it'll kind of suck them in and get them a little more immersed into the stereo field. So let's give that a try and see how that plays out. So we're going to do this super subtly and slowly, and by the time the first verse starts, they will be panned all the way to the sides. Yeah, very cool. Super subtle. We're not going to distract anyone with that, but if you're immersed in the song and you're on earbuds, this is going to suck them right into the song a lot easier with this nice subtlety. We could definitely make it more dramatic, but you hear these things all of the time, but you probably don't recognize them because these are little subtleties that mix engineers will use to help drive the focus of the listener and help them get lost in the music. All right, and now let's get back into some more volume automation, and let's start doing some of the most important volume automation, which is about keeping the mix dynamic, keeping it from getting boring and stagnant, and above all, making sure that our leads stay out on top. Because there's something to be said for not over-compressing your lead vocal or carve too many things out of its way. Now, another great technique for that is to sidechain dynamic EQs, and I have a whole video on that, and I'll leave a link to that in the description of this video. So I don't recommend trying to do everything with volume automation, but when it comes to something like a lead vocal, I might use dynamic EQ sidechains to keep other things out of the way of the vocal, but usually if I need the vocal to peak out a little bit, I want the entire vocal to come up, not just a specific frequency band, because I want to keep the balance of lows and mids and highs in the vocal together pretty much at all times. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that our lead vocal is out on top of the choruses and not too loud in the verses. Because when we're mixing, if we have a stagnant vocal fader, a lot of times it'll be a little too loud for the verses and a little too quiet for the choruses. And again, because we don't want to over squash everything, we're just going to handle that with automation. So here, take a listen to the way the vocal comes into the verse. And here's the vocal coming into the pre-chorus. Burning, burning like ice. And into the chorus. Now I'm dragging your big feet through the snow. So what I want to do is make it a little bit quieter during the verses and a little louder during the chorus and leave the pre-chorus right about where it's at. Here's my blue volume automation line down here below. So here we've ducked it back half a dB quieter during the verses, and then we boosted it 1 dB for the chorus. So let's take a listen. Well, I found my feet on... And the chorus. Now I'm dragging your big feet through the... Now, nice and easy. There's no point to have it louder than need be in the verse, and there's no point to have the listener straining to hear it during the chorus. So that's a nice, simple, quick, easy one. But also what you would do is you would go through your vocal performance, and if you have one word that's too loud or too quiet or one little phrase, you would make a small adjustment there and just try to keep it balanced so the lead vocal is always out on top to the same degree. That takes the edge off of your compressors and trying to handle everything with dynamics processing, and it really, really helps out the overall experience for the listener. Now, let's take a look at the lead guitar solo and do the same thing. So here we've given a little tiny half a dB boost as the solo breaks out, so it's right in the listener's face, and then it dials itself slowly back in a way that's not noticeable and kind of nestles into its little dynamic spot where it lives for most of the solo. It starts with a couple power chords and then hits the first lead note, and that first lead note we've brought it up just about half a dB. And then there's one part towards the end of the solo in here, we've made about a 0.3 dB adjustment where the guitarist went down to the lower register, and instead of doing any EQ work there because we like the overall balance, that part is just a little quiet and muffled and hard to discern, and a tiny 0.3 dB made all the difference. So we'll play you this with the volume automation turned off, and then we'll turn it on. With a little bit of extra help on that first note. By this point in the solo, it's back to where we had originally set it, and coming up right here is a little boost. And there you go. So you just do whatever it takes. Wherever you need a little bit of boost or a little bit of dip, that's what volume automation is for. But something like a lead guitar, you want to make sure that it's always right out on top. Volume automation is a great tool for that. And here at the end of the guitar solo going into the third verse, we're going to boost this tom fill a little bit to give the guitar solo a real climax there. Then we're going to bring it back down and let them build over time so we can add in a little bit more dynamic range going on. Let's take a listen. Yeah, very nice. So we have that boost there of about 1.5 dB for the tom fill, and then the toms quiet down. So as the song gets quiet again for verse 3, everything is dialed back a little bit. We don't need those toms so much in your face anymore. We'll let those slowly build, but we have that one tom fill that we want to boost. That's where we want to bring the toms up a good, healthy amount. Take a listen. Yeah, we want some dynamics there. We want that to really stand out. Let's listen through again.
Favors the brave.
Yeah, very nice.
Gonna charge right.
All right, and now we just need to tighten up the snares and make those quieter there. Just like in the opening of the song, they're just a little bit louder than where we want them. So this way we've taken them down almost 3 dB. Let's take a listen. Actually going to go a little further with those. Yeah, I like that. They don't need to be any louder than that right there. But don't miss this opportunity to change volume levels subtly. This keeps your mix from being stagnant. And remember, it's not always about pushing things forward. A lot of it is about pulling things back. So when they come in at their regular volume, it's more impactful. When it comes to volume automation, sit back and put yourself in the position of the listener, get yourself immersed into the music, and listen for little things that should be a little louder or a little quieter. Or when things are competing, listen to what you want to duck out of the way to let other things breathe. Or when there's quiet spots and loud spots, see if you need to balance those out or if you want to even enhance them further. The possibilities here are pretty much endless. But there you have it. Thanks a lot for checking this out. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll catch you all on the next one.